Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the conference, colleagues, experts, academics, development community representatives, civil society, and public sector representatives. Thank you for joining Regional Gender Conference today. We all come together as we believe in importance of gender equality and women's economic and social empowerment for local development agenda, regional development agenda, and global development agenda. The conference is organized by ISET Policy Institute under auspices of Forum for Research on Eastern Europe and Emerging Economies, free network. So I welcome my colleagues from sites Stockholm, Berok, Minsk, Biceps, Riga, Sefir, Moscow, Senea, Poland, Szczecin, and Kiev School of Economics, as well as my ISET colleagues. As the network has an ambition to bridge the gap between ongoing academic research and policy making, and to stimulate and contribute to the international debate, as well as to intensify the interaction and discussion with other researchers in the region and across the world. In 2019, the network, the free network, with the support of Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, initiated the Forum for Research on Gender Economics, FROGE, to contribute to the discussion on gender equality with a specific focus on the region of Central and Eastern Europe. By highlighting different dimensions of gender inequality and its consequences for socioeconomic development, FROGE aims at bringing the issue of gender equality to the focus of both general public and policymakers. As part of this joint initiative on gender, ISET Policy Institute will present today Regional Gender Equality Index. Today, ISET Policy Institute is 10 years old, and we mark today 10-year anniversary of our institution. And I congratulate my colleagues from ISET Policy Institute with this important milestone of serving evidence-based policymaking in Georgia and in our region. With this, I would like to pass the floor for welcome address of our conference participants to Ms. Natia Trunava, Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia, friend of ISET, whose participation today highlights her professional commitment to importance of gender equality and women's empowerment in economic development agenda. Floor is yours, Ms.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am honored to welcome you and to thank the ISET Policy Institute, first of all, also to express my gratitude towards Free Network and Government of Sweden for organizing this important event, for bringing the issue of gender equality to the focus, as well as contributing to evidence-based policy, which represents a very strong basis for supporting women's economic empowerment and for promoting inclusive economic growth and prosperity, which is our policy priority. I would like to say that significant progress has been made in recent decades in leveling the playing field for economic opportunities, but much more work remains to be done. Politicians, governments, and business sector representatives recognize the benefits for economic growth and development of giving women equal opportunities, and they are seeking to improve their policies and practices in this area. Enabling equal access among men and women to productive resources and inputs, knowledge, financial services, markets, and opportunities for value addition and employment contributes to achieve globally adopted sustainable development goals. Gender inequality represents the global problem, and government of Georgia attaches particular importance to the provision of equal opportunities, to the inclusive access to basic services, encouragement of young women to pursue STEM studies, to improve access to high quality early childhood education and child care. Gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but it is a necessary foundation for the sustainable socioeconomic development. The creation of fair and transparent business environment based on the principles of competition and ensuring equal opportunities for the development represents the key factor for the inclusiveness. Providing women with equal access to education, healthcare, decent work, and representation in political and economic decision-making process will positively affect countries' sustainable development, inclusive economic growth, and poverty reduction. In recent years, Georgia has made significant progress in adoption legislative and policy reforms to foster inclusiveness, to foster equal access to the economic opportunities and female economic activity. Georgia is well performing in terms of female participation in educational attainment. Greater education participation from an early age onward provides better economic opportunities for women by raising the overall level of human capital and labor productivity. According to World Bank, involvement in higher education institutions for women and men, as well as the average years of schooling, is almost equal here in Georgia for women and men, and these figures keep an increasing trend. Although Georgia has achieved sufficient women representation in education, in politics, and several other areas, women remain severely underrepresented in economic activity and entrepreneurship. Increasing women's participation in economic activities will give additional boost to economic development and improving the standard of living. In Georgia, the labor force participation rate for women aged from 15 to 64 years is about 40.4%, while for men, the same indicator is 62%. The employment rate for women is 33.9%, and for men, 49.5% respectively. Above mentioned figures indicate that Georgia has a significant capacity to increase utilization of human capital and thus accelerate economic growth by promoting women engagement and participation in labor force and economic activity. Georgian government, and in particular our Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, via different channels and via financial or non-financial instruments, actively supports private sector competitiveness, support them in the development of business skills, improvement of financial literacy, and promote business integration on international markets. Strong entrepreneurship and SME development is crucially important to encourage women participation in entrepreneurial activities, to strengthen female role in society and economic activity, and increase flexibility of the labor market. It is worth to mention that encouragement of female entrepreneurship and implementation of relevant actions represents one of the main directions of Georgia's SME development strategy. Hence, government support programs are oriented to encourage female participants. Let me conclude saying that Georgians adhere to the gender equality principle, and these values have been followed for centuries in Georgia. Once again, I would like to thank the ISET Policy Institute. I would like to thank Free Network and Government of Sweden for bringing this very important issue, gender equality, on spotlight. As well, I want to thank all participants in advance and to encourage your engagement in discussions actively. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Your participation and the interest you take in this issue is obviously extremely important for mainstreaming gender in the policy agenda in Georgia. Thanks for your participation. With this, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Erik Illes, who is Chargé d'Affaires of Swedish Embassy. Well, Sweden and SIDA are not only sponsors of the project under which we organized today's conference and have been working in the last 2 years on gender research across the region, but Sweden and SIDA are also key friends, sponsors, and supporters of ISET Policy Institute since the day of its establishment. So thank you very much. A lot of successes of ISET Policy Institute could not have been possible without Sweden's support. Off to you, Mr. Illes.
Thank you so much, Tamara. And firstly, I would like to say it's been a pleasure to work over these 10 years together with the ISET-PI, and also to see the progress you made, being now ranked as one of the top domestic policy think tanks and independent policy think tanks. I think also this, what we will discuss today on the Gender Equality Index is an example of how you developed your partnerships with regional actors. You've been mentioning that, but with a broad set of actors from various segments of society. And I just want to start when it comes to this week. We had on Tuesday a development or democracy talk on women in politics, organized here by the Embassy of Sweden in Tbilisi. And it had an eye on local elections this fall but also beyond. And in this seminar, we had participants from the Parliament of Sweden, but also the Parliament here in Georgia. And we could hear some very, very impressive stories about the different type of obstacles that are facing women politicians on a personal level, within the party structure, and in society. And one of the participants, I remember she said that where there is a merit-based system, transparency and accountability, women will thrive. And I think that brings us to the topic today of having a system in place that will enable us to do proper monitoring of progress against policy objectives. I was also part of the meeting mentioned by Tamara in November 2019 with national and multilateral partners. And it was recognized that at the time that while a number of important studies and research had been conducted in this area, there was a need to track progress deeply and systematically. And now we are here at the ISET presentation of the Regional Gender Index, and I really look forward to hearing reflections and discussions among the experts community and academia. I remember that the one of the sources of inspiration was the Gender Equality Index developed by the European Institute for Gender Equality, where you use country level and household data and in order to get more visibility to areas that need improvement and ultimately supports policymakers to design more effective gender equality measures. And I've been looking into the index and how it's been used among the member states, and it is really an important tool to see member states that might backslide when it comes to their gender equality commitments. And this is also the case. We've seen lately that there are 12 member states that are where we see setbacks. Again, looking at these different areas, the domains, the work, money, knowledge, time, power, and health, and also violence against women and intersecting inequalities, I think that Georgia has made substantial progress. We've seen important piece of legislation. We've seen changes in the norms and values among the population. So I think I'm confident that we are on track. And again, it will be interesting to see how the index that has been developed also will enable the countries from the former Soviet Union to compare with the member states within the EU. I think this is an important tool also in relation to Georgia's aspirations towards European integration. So looking forward to discussion today and delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Iles, and once again, thanks to Sweden as well as to you personally for continued interest in fostering regional cooperation and also overall support to the work on gender and its mainstreaming into the development policies. With this, I would like to pass the word to Torbjörn Becker, who is the director of SIDE, Stockholm Institute of Transitional Economies, This institution is part of the free network and the coordinator of the network. Off to you, Toby.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Minister Trnava, Eric, friends and colleagues. Again, my name is Torbjörn Becker. I'm very honored and proud to be part of this distinguished group of people that are introducing the conference today. And as a background, I know several of you on the screen here today. I wish I really was in Tbilisi and I could meet you there in person, but I have been part of the ISET success story since the start of not only ISET PI 10 years ago, but also ISET as a school. And it was actually my first trip to Tbilisi was going to the school and being part of the International Advisory Committee, setting up the faculty that we're now witnessing all the success from Georgia. So it is really a sense of pride and achievement, seeing what you have done. And of course, as Tamara has mentioned, being part also of the free network, ISET plays an instrumental role, not only in cheering us up when we have our conferences together, but also providing new ideas for the gender index that we're going to hear today. And just being wonderful partners to work with in the free network, and of course, for all of us today. And of course, I'm particularly proud that you have taken such an active role in the gender project that we're going to focus on today. I also want to say that I'm also a proud Swedish taxpayer. I'm very happy to see that SIDA has been using our tax money so wisely as to support a very important initiative like this in Georgia. There are few things that have such lasting impact as building local knowledge and capacity and actually being part of bridging the gap that sometimes opens up between research and policy making. And now with, of course, ISET PI, we have this bridge already built by the ISET community, thanks to support from SIDA. So I'm very happy to say that I have put in my few tax money, Swedish kroner, into that process as well. It's really a great sense of pride. I also want to say that the focus today is such a nice example, I think, of collaboration, not only between sort of our research institutes, but that we can actually get an opportunity to collaborate with the government in Georgia and with Swedish inputs into such an important issue as gender economics, equality, and equal opportunities. I mean, from just the numbers we heard here today by the minister, we understand what an enormous potential there is still in Georgia to be had in getting a greater share of women into the labor force and contributing to the successful and sustainable economic development of Georgia. So I really think this is a very nice event to be part of the introduction section, if you want. And I don't really want to steal any more time from all of the interesting discussions. So I just want to thank ISET for organizing this, thank the minister for the great support, and of course, Eric and SIDA for the financial support and intellectual support over all of these years. And I'm really looking forward to a great discussion here today. So I will stop there, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Toby, for your kind words and for recognition of ISET's accomplishment. Dear speakers, we very much appreciate your participation and support. So with this, let me move to the second part of our agenda, which is ISET presenting Gender Equality Index. Eric mentioned a few minutes ago that in November 2019, there was the presentation of very initial shape of this index. And basically at that point, it was focusing on the 3 countries of South Caucasus. Since the team of ISET Policy Institute researchers has been continuing its diligent work and has embraced much greater number of countries from the countries of former Soviet Union. The team was led by my 2 colleagues, Dr. Jaroslava Babic, lead economist of ISET Policy Institute, and Dr. Norberto Pignati, another lead economist of ISET Policy Institute. So they will present the index to you. And this index, in our view, will be of special interest to policymakers, NGO representatives, researchers, academia, scholars from former Soviet countries, but from a much broader region as well. And with this, I'm very glad to say that we have nearly 80 participants from at least 7 countries. As we know many names of the participants, we can say that the number of countries, but there could be much greater number of countries as we don't know all the participants by name. So, the index is data-driven, bird-eye view of gender equality of evolution in post-Soviet space, and in our view can be used to track and benchmark progress on gender issues in individual countries within the region. Off to you, Yasia and Norberto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Norberto Pignat, and as Tamar said, I am a lead economist at the ISET Policy Institute. I will start this presentation. In the first part, I will be introducing the index, how it is structured, and present a snapshot of the index in all of its domains for 2019. And then I will pass the floor to my colleague Yasia, who is going to discuss it.
Norberto, you got muted. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't. Okay, for some reason it got muted. Basically, my colleague Jaroslava will be showing an example of an application, very light one, of course, of the information contained in the index for analyzing the evolution of a country. In this particular case, we will look at the case of Georgia. Of course, as it has been mentioned by the speakers before me, more gender equity means more development. And therefore, again, improving gender equity is not only a goal which has an intrinsic value, which it has, but also is a fundamental step towards achieving the greatest potential in terms of development and in terms of achievement of all the development goals: health, education, social, and economic rights fulfillment, including also actually economic growth. But, as it also has been mentioned, good policymaking requires measures. Measuring gender equality is crucial for understanding the challenges that each country is facing. And again, these challenges are typically country specific, identifying the areas that need improvement, designing targeted interventions, and then monitoring and evaluating the impact of policies. This was the idea behind the creation of the ISET Gender Equality Index, which initially was targeting the South Caucasus countries, but then given the interest and in the project, in the index, and also our growing enthusiasm as we were developing it has been extended now to cover almost all former Soviet Union countries. Well, a lot of this has been said, but I wanted to point out that this index has been developed with the contribution of all the ISET Policy Institute's policy research centers. We see this as part of our effort to build a strong center of excellence in gender studies in Georgia and in the region. And again, everyone is contributing because this is a clearly multidisciplinary and cross-cutting theme that requires very different expertise. It was also possible for us to engage all these resources into this, thanks to the financial support of SIDA, and that came through the financing of the FROGI initiative. And final thanks I would like to give to everybody who has given us feedback since 2019, from the very first presentation in the first International FROGI conference on women's economic empowerment to the latest workshop in 2021, not many weeks ago. Thanks to all this feedback, I think we made a better and more interesting and more solid index. So, without further ado, let me show you the snapshot of 2019 according to our index in former Soviet Union area. As it was mentioned, this gender has been modeled, the gender index has been modeled after the Gender Equality Index developed by the European Institute for Gender Equality. What we tried, so the approach that we adopted was to utilize indicators that could be found in international databases. This was our challenge, find data that were comparable across countries, one of the main challenges. We did succeed with some effort, and you will see the results soon. And this we see as a developing index. So it is ready, it can be used, it is a tool, but it is on development constantly, because as more and better data become available, we plan to keep updating and improving the accuracy of the index. Now, what is in our gender equality index? It is centered over 6 core domains: work, money, knowledge, time, power, and health. Each of these domains is represented by several indicators, 16 indicators, so more than 2 indicators per domain on average. And the indicators themselves are aggregated in subdomains, which are dimensions within a certain domain, like work, in which we can assess different aspects of equality. I will mention briefly some of those as we go on. These indicators, as I said, come from international data sources. We listed them all. We listed here all of them. ILO, UNDP, UNESCO, Institute for Statistics, World Bank, Development Indicators and Gender Statistics, World Health Organization, and country reports. Which countries are included? All former Soviet Union countries, excluding Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, because unfortunately for these countries, even looking very thoroughly at all the existing international databases, we could not collect the necessary information for most of the indicators. Hopefully, if more data about these countries should become available, we'll manage to integrate them into our index. There are 2 non-former Soviet Union countries that we have added to our pool of countries, Greece and Sweden, for very clear and practical purposes. Sweden and Greece historically are the best performing and the lowest performing country in terms of equality index score in the gender equality index developed by EIGE. And so this allows us to benchmark and to compare former Soviet Union countries with the EU. Basically, and this we thought had a merit on its own, and we decided to keep this possible comparability. What years are we able to cover? we have data to monitor the evolution of this index over a quite long period of time, since 2000 and reaching up to 2019, due to the, of course, the lag in the publication of data in international databases. So we cover already 2000, we cover already 19 years in our index. As I said, I will be presenting a snapshot, and it will take a very large amount of time to go in detail on overall these years, and so we want just instead to give you an idea of where we stand at this moment according to our index. And I will be focusing on the domains also, because again, going in detail in all the subdomains might require a lot of time, even though I will refer to them because there are some interesting insights that we can get from thinking to what is happening under the domain level or below the domain level. So this is a picture showing the steps that we have been following, that are followed to get to the index. And of course, it all starts from the selection and processing of indicator that allows us to calculate gender gaps. Then the gender gaps for each countries are benchmarked to the best performing country over the all-time horizon, which is 19 years, in each of the indicators and in each of the subdomains and in each of the domains. And then we get, that allows us then to calculate the gender gap matrix for each of the domains that is aggregated and leads to the calculation of the aggregated index. We will start now. I will now guide you through all the domains: work, money, knowledge, time, power, and health, and show you the performance of former Soviet Union countries that we have in our sample, always in comparison, in a way, with the EU, to see the level, the distance between different countries in all of these areas. So we start with the work domain, which is measuring the extent to which women and men can benefit from equal access to employment and good working conditions. We have in our subdomains, we look at difference in participation, differences in gender segregation, meaning the concentration of men or women in certain sectors, and also differences in the quality of work to which men and women have access. All of these are very relevant dimensions and contribute to give the final score about the work domain. As we say, we can interpret the distance between the score of a country and the potential theoretical maximum as a measure of the potential that this country has to improve its performance, economic and social, by tapping into the resource that is constituted by female labor force. And here is our result. So in the domain of work, the leading countries in our sample is not surprising Sweden. It's interesting to see that all former Soviet Union countries are somehow in this domain comprised between the best performing country of the EU and the lowest scoring country of the EU, which is Greece. If we look here, we see among the top performing countries in the work domain, Estonia, Lithuania, Belarus, Latvia, and near the bottom, we see Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. So the South Caucasus is not performing particularly well under the work domain. Now, of course, we can look into the subdomains and we can see, I think this is the only case in which I will go into the subdomains, because I think it can give you an idea of how our index and weighted structure allows us to dig deeper and analyze the challenges existing. When we look at the work domain, inside of it, as we said, we have participation, gender segregation, and quality of work. These all get different scores. And if we look at the subdomain rankings, we see interesting picture. For example, if we look at participation, countries like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Belarus score higher than Sweden. So when we look both at the level of participation, at the difference between genders, these countries are doing better than even the best performing country in the EU. The other countries are somehow between Sweden and Lithuania. So, but if you remember the work domain score, Azerbaijan and Belarus were not above Sweden, right? And so it is important, and it shows us something when we look at the segregation subdomain, which includes both where women and men are working, whether or not they're segregated in particular sectors. And indeed, we can see that here already the picture changes. And in the segregation subdomain, there is also another component, which is the share of men and women in vulnerable jobs. And you see, I think one of the two most striking cases here are Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, which are at the top when you look at participation, but when you look at the score in the segregation subdomain, are at the bottom. And so you can see that there are very different dimensions along which you have to work. And if you were to give an advice in this case, two different countries, you could say, for example, two countries near the bottom toward this, in the segregation subdomain, to invest into the inclusion of women in sectors in which they are underrepresented and where they might have a potential contribution, but also to ensure that women are less exposed to more vulnerable jobs, right? So it's not only about the quantity of women that are working, but also the quality of the jobs to which they have access. Very interesting insights. And again, of course, what is and this is the final picture, which, as you see, is hiding several aspects. Note that in this case, again, so Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan that are at the top when we look at the participation subdomain go much lower, right? Because this is aggregating the results. So this is a first ranking. Then we can move to the money domain. The money domain is measuring gender inequalities in access to financial resources, in women and men's economic situation, and actually in our index also in the access to financial institutions as proxied by the percentage of men and women that have accounts open in financial institutions. As we see here, the EU countries are here performing much better than most former Soviet Union countries. The only ones that are between Sweden and Greece are indeed EU countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And we see that indeed, so this domain emerges to be one in which, of course, there is a lot of potential for catching up. The knowledge domain is another interesting domain. It measures gender inequalities in educational attainment and participation in education and training over the life course. We would have loved to add another component here, which is the segregation by gender, which is key for the future evolution of gender gaps. Unfortunately, at this stage, we were not able to. So the dimension we capture in our knowledge domain are gender equality in overall educational attainment and in participation in education and training. We look at people aged 15 plus and 25 plus looking at when we look at tertiary education, basic tertiary education. And here you will see a striking picture. So in this domain, most of former Soviet Union countries actually show scores that are higher than Sweden and Greece. And of course, this should be interpreted with a certain caution, because our measure is strictly quantitative. So we capture the number of people with the basic tertiary degrees, the share of women and the share of men with tertiary degrees. And given the history of former Soviet Union, it's not surprising that there is such a high score, because there is an extremely high percentage of individuals aged 25 plus having a basic tertiary degree. And also the gap between the genders is not substantial. But so that is why we said probably a more accurate picture would have come out at, for example, a segregation component, because it will give us a bit more the sense of whether there is an equality also in the fields in which men and women are studying, which again, for the data we have, would change the picture, because indeed there would be, for example, a greater concentration of women in certain areas and men in other areas, and the distinction would be more significant in former Soviet Union countries. Unfortunately, as I said, we have it just for a small subsample, and we could not add it unless we were willing to drop several countries from this part of the index, which of course would have was not worth the cost to us. But again, so it is interesting to see that in this case, there is a picture reflecting possibly a good potential. And if we want, even a greater loss from the lack of participation of women in the labor markets in former Soviet Union countries, because these are well-educated women, by the way. So this is another interesting domain. Then I will show you a picture about the time domain, which is basically showing differences, gender inequalities in the allocation of time spent doing care and domestic work. We base this index on the percentage declared by men and women of time that they spent over 24 hours doing care and domestic work. The picture that comes out is the following. Actually, when we look at this particular indicator, the difference, the gap is between the top performing and the bottom performing countries are not so large. If you compare this, so if you want to increase the coverage of this time domain, it would be interesting to have an additional dimension, which is how the remaining time is spent. An important component would be how much time, for example, men and women can spend in social activities, which is a very important element. And as we said, our index is evolving, and we are planning to include it as soon as possible. But at this stage, we are focusing on the difference between men and women in the reported share of the 24 hours devoted to care and activity. And okay, the share of time is small, both for men and for women, and therefore the gap doesn't appear as large in this index, even though again, we can see a difference across countries. Very important domain to be analyzed is the power domain. The power domain in our index is measuring gender equality in decision-making position across two dimensions, the political one and the economic sphere. Overall, the picture that we get is that former Soviet Union countries are evenly, in a way, distributed from right below Sweden to a bit below Greece, but not too far. So this power domain index points out, indeed, if you look at the score, to a gap, substantial gap still in most countries between men and women. Remember, this comes from two indices, and I can show you also in this case, because I think it is particularly interesting, the subdomains, the political subdomain and the economic subdomain. And also here, the trends underneath the main summary statistics are slightly different and telling. So, for example, we see that the largest gap between former Soviet Union countries and a country like Sweden is in the political subdomain. When we look at the percentage, at the share of women that are represented in the national parliament. In the economic subdomain, actually, we see the difference is not that large, and several countries of former Soviet Union, nominally at least, outperform a country like Sweden. What is this index? This comes from the share of members of boards in the largest quoted companies, right? In our case, the proportion of women that are occupying managerial positions. And you can see several former Soviet Union countries, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Latvia, and Ukraine, declare a larger share of women in managerial position than Sweden. Of course, again, it is when looking at these indices, one has to be careful and interpret them correctly in the sense of looking at what does this exactly mean. But we do think that it is definitely telling us an interesting story, which is the largest inequalities in former Soviet Union countries between men and women are likely to be actually in the power domain area, sphere, more than in the economic domain, at least from what we see here. Then let's move on to the health domain, which is measuring gender equality in three health-related aspects. Health status, which combines life expectancy and expected age of healthy life. Health behavior, so propensity to engage in behaviors that are adverse to health, or positive behavior that are supposed to enhance health, and then access to health services. When we look at this, given the indicators we have, we find again that all the countries under analysis are doing reasonably well in terms of equality between men and women, which is encouraging. Of course, there is a variation, there are margin for improvement, but the situation is interestingly good. So overall, what is the picture? When we aggregate all of these domains, you might have already some guess, but here is the final picture of the aggregate gender equality index for former Soviet Union countries. We see that if they are compared with benchmarks of the EU, many countries actually are already comprised between Greece and Sweden. We see among the top performing countries, mostly due to their performance in work, participation, and educational indexes and so on, are Belarus, Kazakhstan, but then we have Estonia, Latvia, Russia, and so on. We see a bit lagging, but not too far, actually quite close to Greece, Armenia, Georgia, and a bit further away, Kyrgyzstan and Azerbaijan. Is this all? Of course not. I mean, this is a very high-level overview. We think that this already is giving us an interesting snapshot in 2019. It would be more interesting, of course, you might say, to see how the trend went, because now we have these numbers, but from where are we starting? And so let me show you just one more picture before I hand over the floor to Yasia. How did the countries evolve over time? What we know, here I took just a limited period, 2015 to 2019, the most recent period. The picture we see is actually quite optimistic. Most of the countries in former Soviet Union show a trend of convergence towards a country like Sweden, which is a top performing country in the EU. All of them have been growing in their index faster than Sweden, which is not surprising because Sweden is very high, but this implies that the catch-up is happening to one level or the other. In our index, the most impressive catch-up actually was from Armenia, but you see all the countries, most of the countries outperforming Sweden. Only 2 countries from former Soviet Union actually have been growing also, but at a lower pace than Sweden, and these have been Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. And interestingly enough, our index captures also some deterioration in a sub-period of 15-17 of Greece and Lithuania, which points out actually to the accuracy of our index when we double-checked whether this was the case also in the EU index. There was also the same, these 2 countries were the only ones having a deterioration over this period of time. So this made us even more confident about our work and our results. So the main message is we now have a picture. We can identify the critical areas for all of these countries. We can monitor the evolution over time. We can look at what happened in the past. We can see what the critical issues are now. Hopefully, we can inform policymakers, NGOs, donors about where to target their efforts. And then maybe we can complement this with additional policy work that studies past changes and analyzes past trends at the domain and subdomain levels to take new lessons and suggest policy actions. We can also use this index to then evaluate the results of the policies that will be put in place. And we think this could be a major contribution of this tool. So we think this can be used, of course, as a tool that can be used for country level analysis, for comparative purposes, and also at the regional level analysis. If one wanted, for example, to build an index for the South Caucasus or for sub-regions. I stop here. I leave the floor to Yaroslava, who will be actually showing you a short example of how we started using this tool to analyze Georgia. Please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norberto. I will now share my part, which is a continuation of yours. So let me get to the So in this part of the presentation, I will focus on just one country, Georgia, and this will illustrate how academics, policy analysts, policymakers can use this index to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of a country in the area of gender equality. Also, how the index can put the country's gender equality progress into perspective, both historical and geographical. So let's first take the bird's eye view of that index development for Georgia. On this graph, you can see the index going back all the way to 2000. And you can see how it evolved since then. So the scale on this graph, I put it on purpose from 0 to 100, the actual scale, the lowest and the highest possible index scores. And you can already see that Georgia is somewhere in between the highest and the lower value. You can also see 2 other countries, which Norberto mentioned, our comparator countries, Sweden and Greece. So it is not very hard to see that from 2016, Georgia has caught up with Greece and has been running head-to-head since. And this is a very positive development for Georgia. So much progress has been made since 2009. And even before that, the fact that the line appears flat, it's not necessarily the indication that there was a lack of progress, but it could be reflective just of the availability of data. There are some actual data points that are not available going further back. So the index uses the data points from the closest years, which is typically the practice in this type of work. So for more in-depth look on how things have evolved in Georgia, I picked just 3 years. The years that that have least problems with data availability, meaning that they have most actual data points, not interpolated from different years. So this is 2011, 15, and 17. And in this slide, in the first row, you can see that the overall index for Georgia has improved significantly by 9.2 points in these 6 years. And most of the progress happened, not surprisingly, in the 4 years, and then in the next 2 years. And you can also see from here that this progress was driven mainly by 2 domains. It is money and it is power. And to some extent, knowledge domain has also been contributing to the improvement of the scores. The money domain progress has been particularly remarkable because you can see a 5.8 point score points improvement over the 4 years, 2011 to 2015, and then a jump of 6.8 points over just 2 years, 2015 and 2017. The domain of power also showed remarkable progress. This time we can see most progress from 2011 to 2015. On the other hand, the work domain, there has been some improvement and some pulling back in the 2015. So what is going on? So what has been happening? We can take a quick look at the insider view at this and these domains. So the work domain, you can see here there are 2 subdomains, participation and segregation. And participation index, you can see, has been driven mostly by the duration of working life indicator. So what is this indicator? It basically takes the usual duration of working years for men, also for women, or women and men, and then multiplied by the probability of employment in these years. So by the employment to population ratio. And the reason, for example, that the duration, this indicator has improved between 2011 and 2015 for women was because women's employment has been growing at that time quite fast. But unfortunately, it stagnated somewhat. The employment to population ratio stagnated since 2015, and even there was a slight pullback, perhaps due to the regional economic crisis that started around 2014. While for men, the same indicator, employment to population ratio, has not stagnated so much. So this is, what was responsible for the participation, for the pullback in the participation score. But you can also see, for example, that, the segregation, back to segregation, that for the segregation index has improved, and much of the progress came from the improvement of women on the scores for vulnerable employment. This means that there were women, that there were less and less women in vulnerable employment, and their improvement was even faster than men's, especially since 2011. But now let's look at this star performer, the money domain. So what has been happening there? Why has it improved so much? Part of the picture is this gross national income per capita accrued by women versus men. So their improvement happened, not surprisingly, mostly in 2011 to 2015. And the pullback from 2015 is due to this crisis years. But this, you can see here that most of the progress is due to the fact that more and more women acquired accounts in financial institutions. So there was a 23 percentage points improvement from 40% of women having accounts in financial institutions to 63% of women with accounts in financial institutions by 2017. This is quite remarkable. And the last one I'm going to talk about before I hand over the floor to Tamar is the power domain, which is also quite, Georgia showed quite remarkable progress. In 2011, the National Parliament of Georgia, only 7% of seats were held by women. By 2017, this share was already 16%. And now, with the changes in the election law, this share is even higher. This, as you can see, the index can tell us a lot about the relative position of women in the society, and it highlights the areas of biggest improvements that have been made, and also highlights the areas where some interventions or policy attentions will be needed. In particular, it would be interesting to study the impact of various external shocks, such as COVID-19 shocks. And now we would like to see, I'm handing the floor to our director, Tamar, and we would welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norberto and Yasia. I personally enjoyed this a detailed presentation of basically a comparative results of the post-Soviet countries, and we welcome questions from the audience. You can post your question in chat. I think not to lose any time. So please post your question right now. But before we do that, let me introduce, our agenda. Norberto and Yasia will answer a couple of questions, and we have to move to the two panels that we have in the agenda today. The first panel is composed of the expert community and policymakers, and which will be followed by the second panel of academics, and these will be representatives of the free network institutions. So let me see. There are no questions at this point. In the interest of time, I think you can post your questions as we start the first panel, and it is my pleasure to introduce you the panel of policymakers and experts. We have three distinguished women, very successful women in this panel, representing three countries of our region. The first, and I would pass the floor to her right after the introductions, is Nino Zilosani, who is chair of Agrarian Committee in the Parliament of Georgia, but at the same time, she's chair of Gender Equality Council of the Parliament of Georgia, and I would like to thank her for participation today. The second participant and speaker in the panel is Ms. Dr. Tatiana Korotka. She is from Ukraine. She's a deputy business ombudsman of Ukraine, my personal friend, very active woman who has experience in the private sector and in the public sector in Ukraine. And the third participant is Ms. Valentina Bodruglungu from Moldova. She is the president of Moldova's one of the leading gender NGOs, Gender Centru. So with this distinguished panel, let me pose my question and pass the word to Nino first. We would like you to reflect on the state of gender policies and the progress in your respective countries, and what, in your view, is the key issue and what needs to be done next. So, you can connect this with, what you just saw and heard from Norberto or Yasia, or your own perspective, not connected to the index that was just presented. So, floor is yours, Nino.
Thank you, Tamara, very much. Dear friends, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Parliament Gender Equality Council and share insights and perspectives how we see women empowerment in the country, where unfortunately gender inequality remains a challenge in a number of sectors and fields. Structural factors such as the lack of investment in care and social protection, labor regulations that do not support the reconciliation of paid labor with domestic care and maternity, together with the underdeveloped gender-responsive budgeting and gender mainstreaming in economic development policies, hinder women's economic participation and empowerment in Georgia. Unfortunately, women are still underrepresented in decision-making processes at all levels and in all spheres of public life. They are less frequently found in managerial positions and frequently subjected to horizontal and vertical segregation in all types of institutions. What's more is that women are severely underrepresented in the security sector in Georgia, both in general and in decision-making positions. Women and girls in Georgia still suffer from various forms of gender-based violence, and it, of course, frustrates. Consequently, all the above-mentioned issues stay a pressed matter for us, which we strive to combat. The economic and political empowerment of women, the informational campaigns to raise the awareness of society on gender-based violence and harassment, and the further development of juridical base towards more gender sensitivity are the priorities of our future actions. We are holding these activities together with the legislative changes which we have done very accurately, beginning from the Istanbul Convention ratification, sexual harassment amendments, gender quotas, and so on and so on. For over several years now, our council has undertaken prominent role to alter Georgia into a better place for women. This year especially, our plans have gone bigger to encompass gender councils established in the municipal levels, local levels, as well as ensuring countrywide campaigns to equip women and girls with proper knowledge about their rights and opportunities. We partnered up with our donors and local organizations to make information decisions on mutual expertise, creating a new state concept of gender equality and appropriate legal framework are one of our main directions of our efforts in the Council, as Georgia is committed to support gender equality at the high systematic level. This year, we are starting thematic researches on several vital topics, such as monitoring Istanbul Convention implementation, preventing sexual harassment of underage girls, women's role in shadow economy, and implications of COVID-19. Also, women's economic empowerment policy document, which we are working with our very good and strong donor organizations and experts of the field, and as well as renewing several previous reports. Nowadays, under the legislative changes, parties have become obliged to take responsibilities of the gender aspect when submitting their party list to the Election Commission. The amendments introduced 25 gender quotas. This number is not big enough, but it's a good place to start. Regardless, we envisage to increase the total number of women MPs up to 50 in 2028, which would be 1/3 of the total number of MPs. Gender quotas were also introduced at the local election regulations, where every second number of the list must be different gender. Furthermore, this year we also widen our focus to include issues of women political and economic empowerment, as well as gender pay gap. Both of these topics heavily featured in international reports about Georgia, including in the World Bank's Gender Assessment Report. Therefore, it's of utter significance that the latter are included to our mission. in our mission. Lastly, we are committed as ever to further deepen international cooperation and partnership and to successfully adhere to all the commitments that Georgia has undertaken. Indeed, we are open to new opportunities in order to create safe and prosperous environment for every woman in Georgia. Our efforts are really we're really very big, and we are going on behalf of women's rights. Thank you very much for this chance to participate in this very important meeting, and I'm ready to answer the questions in the case these are.
Nino, thanks very much. And first of all, thanks for finding time in your extremely busy agenda for this and for your support and leadership on gender in the parliament as the chair. So let me with this pass to the next speaker from Ukraine, to Tatiana, and then to the speaker from Moldova, Valentina, and then we can take questions and answer those questions as a panel. Tatiana, off to you, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in such a great event. Really very interesting index was presented to us, and I even noticed that you had gender balance during the presentations, which is very, yeah, very notable for me, because Business Ombudsman Council it's a multi-stakeholders ombudsman mechanism in Ukraine that was set after the Revolution of Dignity by different stakeholders like European Bank of Reconstruction of Development, OECD, biggest business associations, and the government of Ukraine. And we also established our office based on the best principles and best approach. So our staff divided purely 50% of women and 50% of men, even on the top management level. First, let me say a couple words about the index itself and the information, because that was a notable also for me that according to the index, I knew that in Ukraine we have a more or less good situation. I will outline my insights a little bit later, but it was interesting to note that Belarus, according to the presentation, have a perfect situation with the gender equality, gender balance, and so on. At the same time, we know that what kind of events we have right now, what kind of situation we have right now in Belarus. And thinking about the role of women in the democracy development, I definitely remember about the women's activity in Belarus during these events and in summer. So as for Ukraine, I am not a gender expert, pure gender expert. At the same time, I also prepared several ideas, yes, several facts about the current situation in Ukraine with this issue. In the interest of time, I will outline some of them. Okay, definitely, women in Ukraine have equal opportunities with men if they desire to embody them. This opinion is quite common. However, through the prism of my experience, it's difficult for me to fully agree with it, because as a deputy business ombudsman, I'm well acquainted with the gender issues in business and corporate governance. In Ukraine, the principles of gender equality implemented at all levels of the constitution and many laws and regulations under the pressure of civil society. There is constant work on the development of gender legislation, which was actually reflected in the information presented in index. And institutionally, at least formally, everything is more or less good in Ukraine. There are corresponding vertical starting from Verkhovna Rada, Parliament of Ukraine, specially authorized authorities, commissioned on gender issues. So civil society is actively working on these issues. Well, recent studies that was provided also with the support of Swedish government suggest that Ukraine's annual economic growth could accelerate by $7 billion if women employment is equal to the men's one. So it's a significant. It's clear that we should be more involved in the employment. And if the employment rate of women becomes the same as in Sweden, 80%, we could also increase Ukrainian GDP more than 9%. So far, against the background of growing demand for labor resources in Ukraine, the employment rate of women in Ukraine is 45, probably a little bit more percent, which also shows the dynamics of increasing of the share of women in the management position in Ukraine. But what is interesting, while the gender gap is more than 20%, I personally think that this is even more than 20% gender pay gap. Definitely in Ukraine, there is a glass ceiling still greatly hinders career development. There is a very clear trend. The higher the government, the fewer women there are. Women are not allowed to higher positions with the higher salaries, but work mainly on those areas where is lower incomes. For example, there are many women in SMEs, management position and among owners, and far fewer among top business executives. In the humanitarian sphere is the same trend. Kindergartens are mostly run by women, but there are more known among university leaders in Ukraine. And so in all industries. About 40% of Ukrainian entrepreneurs are women and half of the small businesses. And thinking about democracy development, it's clear for me that our regions, regional economy probably based on these SMEs run by women. It's important because probably their situation reflects the general situation in Ukraine. We should ask these people. No, unfortunately, and we are all hostages of stereotypes and sexism. I should mention it because even me sometimes had problem with it. After the perfect publication, a perfect interview, having a good education, high-level position, I received comments mostly on my appearance, then comments regarding the ideas that I expressed. I don't like it, of course, but this is a real situation, and very often among high-level men, I'm an only woman, and they could have joke on certain issues, but I guess this is not a good situation for women in this from this point of view. But we should clear understand it and clear express our no satisfaction with this state of with this state of play. We also there is well. I would like also to mention about these issues regarding quotas. Yeah, you know, the gender quota, this is a popular idea. And currently related to the corporate governance, we are discussing the draft law, which try to set this 40% quota in the supervisory boards for state-owned enterprises. I mean, women presence and in the corporate sector. This issue is actively discussed right now, and in this case, I like an example from my friend. This is his favorite example, that in 2017, quotas was introduced in Ukraine for Ukrainian language music products, for radio, for TV. And not all songs were successful, were good, but it allowed new great performers to appear. It allowed new great musicians to appear their products. And I hope that in case these quota principles will be set, we also will give more opportunities to professional women to be presented and make decisions. But however, for this, we should have a long-term gender strategy, definitely, because when we are talking about the equality and diversity, the higher level task, not just to provide this equality like men and women on sex, on our sex, based on our sex, but the higher level idea is to provide the equality and of opportunity and diversity of opinions. So that was an idea of this diversity. So it's a little bit chaotic. I provided my insights a little bit in a chaotic way. Sorry for this, but I'd like to give more time to other speakers to talk, because I'm not a very good expert related to social issues, and probably you have you could find more information from the official statistics and other type of research. But to summarize, the situation of women demonstrates that the level of democracy in the country reflects our situation, and the Ukraine definitely has a room for improvement for women and to cover these gender issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for reflecting on Ukraine and your professional and personal experiences. Particularly from the standpoint of the business sector, which in many ways confirmed the various evidences suggested by index presented by my colleagues. With this, let me pass to Valentina Bodrug-Lungu from Moldova.
Thank you, Tamar. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for invitation and for opportunity to use our platform to sharing our experience. Thanks to previous speakers, it was very interesting analysis and the special data regarding the situation of all our country. I think we have many common points, but of course, every country has specific situation, national context. Republic of Moldova, I think it's in the same situation that Georgia, Ukraine, and the other country regarding legal framework. All our countries have a very good legal framework. We have a national constitutions, we have many laws. In Moldova, we have a gender equality law, we have a domestic violence law, yeah? We have a national strategy on gender equality, on domestic violence issues. Also special provisions on sexual harassment, on gender-based discrimination, special provisions in labor code and penal code, and many very important instruments to combat and prevent gender-based violence and to promote gender equality. The last years, Moldova have significant progress. Increase the number of women in parliament. Now we have a 25% of women in parliament. 22% of women are mayors at local level. And according to different index, including gender gap report and our index, Moldova is in good positions. But as representative of civil society and the academic area, I would like to mention that it's a good progress on paper many times. Yes, we have a very good legal framework, but it's a big challenge with implementation, because many laws and strategy are on paper. And in gender-based and gender disaggregated data, it's real instrument to measure the real progress. But for me, as representative of civil society and academic area, it's a big challenge, all gender disaggregated data, because during our analysis, you know, we discuss about quantitative data. And if we take into consideration only quantitative data, in many countries, the situation is good. But the problem is, what is reality? What is quality of the situation in labor market, in the health sector, in the education sector, at political level? Tamar mentioned, Tatiana mentioned, from Ukraine mentioned the sexism and gender-based violence. For us, it's a huge problem, especially during election process. You know, Moldova now have a woman president. It was very, very difficult election process due to the fact that many women candidates, not only for president, but for parliament during parliament election, were blamed or stigmatized. It was a real huge sexism against women during the election process. Who discuss about this? It's a big challenge for women to be at decision-making level, at high-level positions. In Moldova, for example, thanks to UN Women Support, we organized it. We have a gender monitor, special platform. It's an opportunity for different people to address the question and cases of gender-based violence, sexism, and discrimination during the election process. For example, in Moldova, we are in the new process, new parliamentary election. It's a huge challenge for us. Why? Due to the fact, one of the problems for gender equality too is the political instability. Moldova is in very interesting situation. The part of population and politicians, political class are oriented to Europe and other part to Russia. And this division, it's very challenging for us because it's a huge barrier to thinking in the future, into ensure sustainability of all our action. Due to the fact that gender equality policy need sustainability. But that is challenging during the different ministries and during the different parliamentary elections, governance, and others. For example, Moldova signed the Istanbul Convention, but we didn't ratify it. Why? Because some part of political class don't like this convention, and they put focus on reinforce family value against Istanbul Convention. It's not new. We know it's an instrument of manipulation and reinforce stereotypes. Thus, we have in all country good legal framework, but we need to ensure sustainability and implementation of this legal framework. Exactly as mentioned Yaroslava, we need to ensure concrete fundings, not only on paper, and very interesting, in all our law and strategy, we have a specific remarks. We will allocate special funds according to the budget, but nothing about concrete figures. The next point, it's important in all this process, elaboration of policy, implementation, we should use gender analysis instrument. We need to collect and ensure the quality of gender data and to use gender indicator for elaboration of policy framework. It's very important. including at local level. I know Georgia have a very good experience to work at local level, to promote gender equality at local level. And localization of gender equality, I think it's crucial due to the fact that all documents that are adopted at national level, many people at local level don't know about this policy. And it's crucial to connect local and national level. And of course, to ensure national machinery. I would like to congratulate Georgia due to the fact that you have a Human Rights Council, but also you have a Gender Equality Commission. In Moldova, we lost these issues due to the fact, exactly, it's lack of political will. We have a Council on Human Rights, it's very good, but our Commission on Gender Equality is not functional. Thanks now, it's Vice Prime Minister, she is a woman, she understands these issues, she restarted process, but it's dangerous to connect gender equality machinery, which one person personalize these issues. It should be strong national political commitment. And of course, it's very important to involve all stakeholders, governance, civil society, academia. It's very, very important to ensure diversity of opinion, platform for discussions, and strong monitoring and evaluation. Thank you very much, Tamar.
Thank you very much, Valentina. This is very interesting to hear reflections from policymakers and practitioners and experts from the three countries who also represent different sectors. A fascinating conversation, but we have to follow our agenda, and I have to apologize to all participants so far. We received 2 questions. In the interest of the conference, we have to proceed as we are pretty much behind the agenda, and I have to give the floor to Yaroslava Babic, who will now lead the next panel of free network academic community. At the end of this panel, if there is time, we can definitely address questions. And so far, we just have 2 questions that were addressed to Yaroslava and Norberto. So off to you, Yasia, for the panel of our academics. Thank you very much to Nino, to Tatiana, and to Valentina for fascinating reflections.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamriko. In fact, I think we can quickly address these 2 questions because I don't think they will take much time. One was a question from Georgia about the fact that, well, Georgia doesn't yet have the time use survey. So where is the data on the time dimension comes from? So whenever my answer to this was that, whenever we didn't have the actual time use data, time use surveys, we used publications and surveys by reputable international organizations. In our case, it was UN Women publication from 2018, which asked pretty much similar question to what you would find in the time use survey. How much time do you spend, caring for elderly children, doing household tasks, cooking, cleaning, repairing, and so on. So our sources were not using the time use surveys, were from country-level publications, typically. And another question was on whether gender-based violence was part of our index. And the answer to that, I'm going to answer it to save time. Actually, this is one of the pillars in the European Gender Equality Index as well, but it has not been used there yet. The main concern is the availability of data. In our case, it's exactly the same. We don't yet have the data on gender-based violence for this number of countries. So we are hoping that once the data becomes available and more countries start paying attention to collecting this data, then we will be able to incorporate gender-based violence into this process. Okay, so if maybe if Norberto has anything to add, like 2 minutes, and then we will start the academic panel.
Very quickly, yes, on the violence, as Yasser was saying, the European index doesn't include it either. The challenge is in having a proper measure of violence, and also the fact that, again, this is a very sensitive topic, so collecting accurate information is complicated. So there are countries that have very high scores of violence, actually. So they have a lot of reported violence, and countries that have very low reported violence. And then that does not necessarily measure correctly the violence there. There is also the issue of how you include that into the index. One of the reasons why one of the challenges also in the EU index is that they say we are aiming at eliminating violence in this case, not at eliminating the gap. But okay, this is I don't want to enter into this discussion. Just to say that, again, it's not so straightforward to include the violence dimension into this. There was another question that I can address very quickly. How does, as our index being compared with other indexes? Yes, we checked other indexes. The main comparison for us was actually the EU one, but we looked also at others. We can say that there is a relatively, I mean, for the EU one, for the countries that we have there, which are 5 in our sample, we have a very good correlation between the position and the ranking they have in our index and in the other index. So there is very strong consistency. As I said, when we found some countries showing a deterioration, we were a bit concerned. And then we checked the EU index and we found that those countries were the only one that also had the deterioration there. So actually then we were happy that we captured that, even though it's quite different access to data because we use internationally available databases. And of course, so I would say, yes, we have done comparison. We can always do more comparison with other indices, but I think so far our index seems pretty robust.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for your questions. And we are hoping to continue discussion and conversation, via other channels as well. But now we are going, it's time for our academic panel to start. During this panel, we will hear expert opinions from members of academic community. Our panel will feature researchers from 6 countries, which are represented by Gender Equality Index: Armenia, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, Sweden, and Latvia. And all of these researchers are part of Free Network, the logos of which you see in my background. As Tamar mentioned, as Toby mentioned, this network of think tanks across transition economies. And these researchers have been specifically working on gender issues in their respective countries. So we will hear short reflections from representatives, and then we'll have a short Q&A session. So I will now give floor to Pamela Kampa from SITE, Stockholm Institute for Transition Economics. Thank you very much, Pamela.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So okay, I cannot share my screen, so probably I will just speak. It says that the host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think Becca can enable your.
Otherwise, it's just one slide. We can talk without the slide.
You can share the screen.
Now I can. Yes. Thank you. So do you see my screen now? Yes. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about Sweden, which is a country that is in this in this report for which the index has been computed, because it's a champion of gender equality, which is something that definitely we should celebrate and be very proud of. But here in this occasion, I actually want to point out to the fact that even in Sweden, even in the land of gender equality, there are some issues that are actually pointed out by the index as well once we look into the sub-indexes. I'm sorry for the very probably high background noise, but it's very hot in Sweden today. I need to keep the window open. So one feature about Sweden is that there is a relatively high level of horizontal job segregation, meaning that there is a high concentration of women in education, health, and social work. And along this particular dimension, actually Sweden, in the countries that for which the index was computed, is one of the worst performers, together with Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And then, of course, we could debate for hours whether this is an issue or not. So what are the implications of women being concentrated in these sectors and what are the causes? And in terms of implication, one thing that we should quickly notice is that this segregation into particular sectors can result into gender pay gaps, meaning that women are concentrated in the most lower paying sectors. But this is something that, of course, will take time to discuss. Importantly, this segregation is reflected also in the segregation in education. So this is an aspect that is not analyzed in the index, but in Sweden there is a high level of gender segregation in education, with relatively few women in STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This is not a feature which is unique to Sweden, but actually it has been noticed by other researchers that in general, countries with high levels of gender equality have a low share of women in STEM fields. Very interesting gender equality paradox. Someone points out that this means that in these countries, women are more free to pursue their comparative advantage. Some evidence tells us that that's not the full story, because even when girls have a comparative advantage in STEM fields in high school, then moving on to tertiary education, they tend not to choose these fields for their education. Another critical issue of Sweden is when we look at women in political power. As we saw, Sweden is a top performer there for very good reason, very high share of women in parliaments, and actually a majority of the current Swedish government ministers is female. However, interesting fact to notice, in the long history of Swedish democracy, we have never had a female prime minister. So even in Sweden, there is work to do there. Finally, in terms of economic power, the index will suggest that Sweden is not doing so badly, but it's middle of the ranking. However, I do think that in this respect, we are even probably underestimating the gender inequality in economic power in Sweden, because we are looking at the share of women in boards, but in the Nordic model of governance, really what matters is who is in the executive positions. And the share of women among the CEOs of the biggest publicly listed company in Sweden is 5%, so quite low. So I think that's all. We need to be quick, but the overall message is that even in Sweden, the job is not done yet.
Thank you very much, Pamela. This is really fascinating story about the top leader country, and we are glad to have your perspective. So I will now invite Lev Lvovsky from Berok, Belarus, to share his reflection.
Okay, now I'm with sound. So first of all, let me thank ISET for organizing such a great event. Thank you, Tamar, Yaroslava, and Norberta. I really think that this index is a great idea and is just the beginning of a long road. Sorry, I'm a little bit sick. So a couple of things about this index on Belarus. Belarus indeed is traditionally a relatively good standing country in terms of gender equality. Well, of course, relative to other countries in the region, so it doesn't mean that Belarus is an ideal country for gender equality. We inherited from Soviet Union this very high level of female labor force participation and economic activity of women. I think even like culturally, society expects this from women, and this traditional norm nowadays becomes something that drives our gender equality, makes it better. Also, traditionally, we have rather large level of segregation, of work segregation. So although women participate pretty much equally in the labor force, they work in very specific areas. Those areas are usually lower paid than male traditional areas, and there is a lot of work to be done to change this cultural norm. So again, it's not about laws, it's more about cultural norms in the society. We are also traditionally very good at equal access to education. Well, I think now males in Belarus have a little bit less equal access to education than females. So here we are also in trend with the most developed nations in the world. But there are also some dimensions where this index is not really capturing Belarus situation very well. I am talking about this power index, power sub-index. Indeed, Belarus has a lot of women in parliament, although this parliament is pretty much nothing if you would look at it on the ground. So Alexander Lukashenko at some point, I think it was even after some discussions with representatives from Sweden, when he decided to make Belarus look more equal, and then he just ordered so that more women would be in parliament. But these women do not decide anything, as well as men. So this equality that looks like equality in some sub-index, we are right after Sweden in this power dimension. Basically, there is large discrepancy between index and reality. Well, I'm not the person to suggest, but maybe it would be possible to have some correction of this index. For example, I don't know, multiplication of this index by political freedom index, so that a country not just have a woman on some position, but this woman can actually decide something, because if she is just a decoration person, then it doesn't matter if it's a woman or man or whoever. The same with with positions on boards in largest corporations. Largest corporations are not publicly traded in Belarus. Most of them are owned by government. Yes, there would be some women. Does it mean that these women have power? I don't know. So it depends. In some cases, yes, indeed, they have power in these corporations. In some other cases, they're just nominally there. Well, another thing that was not in index, and experts already started to talk about it, is violence. Traditionally, Belarus had problems with gender-based violence. They were not as large as in some other countries in the area, but not captured very well as in some European countries. But speaking about future of Belarus, I am afraid that this problem actually may become way more important and way bigger. The thing is that due to the political crisis that is currently happening in Belarus, deterioration of law enforcement institutions and deterioration of trust, I'm afraid that this situation will lead to the fact that practically no woman who would be beaten at home or raped would even think about going to police, because they would be much more afraid of police than of their bad husband or somebody on the street. So on this unhappy note, I will conclude. Yes, I think overall Belarus is not doing bad in gender equality dimension. There are many things to work on. We of course have a gender wage gap. It is in some mid-range, but nowadays I'm afraid that we are stepping back from this post-Soviet trend, and I'm afraid that we can become worse in this gender equality dimension in several key areas.
Thank you very much, Lev. This is really interesting and just highlights how important freedoms, political freedoms are for women's progress and women's equality, what Eric has mentioned in the beginning. I will now pass the floor to Sergey Gubin from Biceps, Latvia. Welcome, Sergey.
Hi, hi from Riga. Can I share my screen? Yes, I can, I think. Right. Let me briefly outline the progress of gender equality index development in Latvia. On the graph, you see the progress over the past 20 years with some ups and downs. In principle, the trend line is upward sloping, so there is a progress. And if you look in separate indicators, those are progressing more or less in the same direction. So this is quite a broad development in Latvia. We're getting better in this field. However, if you notice, the very last 2 years, 2018 and 19, had a rather large jump from 2017. And in fact, Latvia is the second top performer of the index across all the countries presented in the study. So I found it curious what would drive that result. So let me show some findings. I decided to look at the development over the past 10 years from 2009 to 2019 across all the 6 domains. Some domains are stagnant, some are improving. In particular, what stands out is a power domain. The story there is quite different from what we just heard from Lev, from Minsk, of course. But indeed, the change is a dramatic 35%. So one particular indicator stands out, and this is share of females among members of parliament. The increase of more than 2.5 times of number of females in the parliament since our last elections. It's just one event that triggered such a drastic improvement, and that in turn resulted in a change in the overall gender equality index. And it's a peculiar situation, and while my immediate response would be, well, maybe that's just an outlier, a volatility, so showing that the index might be a bit too volatile and too sensitive to one particular indicator. On the other hand, who knows, in a way, maybe this is a sign of the progress, and this indicator is indeed so sticking and then sometimes changing, not gradually, like some other indicators, for example, in the health domain, where improvement is very steady across the time. This indicator is volatile, and maybe indeed it shows the right picture, so to say. So let me return back to the general gender equality index. So you see this jump is just this one indicator. But so my overall impression from the index, it's quite insightful, and it's nice that you collected all the data for Latvia, and then people can actually look in details in different domains. I didn't find anything striking, let's say, something that I felt wrong or so. So overall, it's an interesting and fair picture of what happens in Latvia. That's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sergey. In fact, Latvia is one of those biggest improvers. so it was good to hear your story. Yeah, interesting that it's happening across different countries in the former Soviet Union. So now I will invite Irina Denisova from Safir New Economic School, Russia. Welcome, Irina.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. I have some short presentation to show, so I will share my screen. Hopefully it's in. So first, I would like to congratulate our colleagues from ISET on the very important and interesting result, so that they came up with the regional gender equality index, so that it's of interest for comparison across different countries in the area, in the region, but also, well, within as Sergey mentioned, just it's also an interesting integrated index to understand developments within each country. And well, during those short minutes allowed for my presentation, I would like to mention several things. First, just looking at these different dimensions, we can see that Russia is positioned differently across different dimensions of this index, and well, traditionally, probably that in terms of the employment and well, gender differences under the subdomain of work, we are doing not that bad, but still we do have some gaps in terms of wage gap, and also in terms of employment and well, segregation of female professions within certain sectors, and I will say several words after that on the next slide. But in terms of say the dimension mentioned as knowledge, which is related to the level of education, basically, Russia is doing pretty well here in terms of gender equality, and well, for some dimensions, in terms of the share of females having tertiary education, Russian females are doing much better here. So in this respect, this is particularly the feature which allows Russian, well, the wage gap in the labor market to be not that wide as it could be, well, conditionally the females have lower level of education. Well, Russia is doing, it's what's slightly surprises me is well, this almost absence of the gender gap along the dimension of time, because well, I would think that, well, as in many other countries, we do have this gender inequality in terms of allocation of time in the, well, to the direction of providing some assistance, caring about taking care about children and senior people in the family, and there is well still this gender asymmetry here. So well that's sort of surprising result with respect to this index, but this is about the how good measurements we have in this area. Speaking about the dimension of power, it does reflect the situation. I think I would agree that it does reflect the situation that this is the worst in terms of gender equality dimension in Russia. And well, as is shown by in this slide, the dimensions of this index, sub-dimensions, they are related to the share of members of parliament and members of boards in companies. And even though, well, there is some improvement along this dimension in the recent years, but still, well, there is a long road to go here. And it's very good that this index allows to highlight this situation and also to point to the fact that Russia is, well, below certain countries in this direction. Also, well, looking at the, I would say several words about two other dimensions, domains of health, for example, and here. The general question, which is related also to some other subdomains, which are measured by the index, is how do we interpret the well, the higher or lower score along those dimensions? Because, for example, with respect to the behavioral issues related to health, say smoking and harmful drinking, so, well, is it good to have more gender equality in this respect or not? Because it would be good to have, if we have this more equality across genders, if we are moving in the direction of less harmful behavior, that's okay. But for example, with smoking, it's known that well, younger females, they tend to smoke more than the earlier generations of females, and in this sense, there is some equalization of the ratio of those percentage of those females and males smoking. So males start smoking, younger males start smoking less, but younger females start smoking more. So this is about interpretation. How do we interpret whether this equality in this is well, for the good or for not the direction we would like to see. But anyway, so it's a very interesting and useful exercise, and the result of this exercise is very important, so that we can trace the dynamics of very important directions which are related to the gender gaps in different dimensions, and they could be compared across different countries in the region, which is of special interest because statistics is not that perfect yet, and probably also well, based on this index, the demand for better statistics in this area in the region would increase, and that would be for the better and for the benefit of all the stakeholders which are interested in the well, improvement of the situation with respect to gender gaps in this region. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irina, for these insightful comments. And indeed, we think that index itself can be an instrument for progress insofar they demand for data and further inquiry and insights. So thank you very much. And now I will invite Alexandra Grigorian and also Knar Khachaturian from the American University of Armenia, our neighbors. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you, Yaroslava, and I want to thank ISET for this great conference. think it's very important to hear experts' opinions and also what scholars say about gender equality or inequality in the region. And I start with a quick review of what's going on in the region, in South Caucasus. So you can see that Armenia has improved dramatically in the recent couple of years, and specifically the years 2000, the period 2015, 2017 is pretty, the period was pretty good for Armenia from the gender equality perspective. And then we have a little bit drop in 2018, but then in 2019, which is right after the Velvet Revolution, we again got a high number, and basically we can say that we are almost a leader in the region. And here I want to quickly focus on the period 2015-17, in which we have this great improvement. So there are two domains in which Armenia did a good job: money and power. I would explain the improvement of money domain by the transformation of the industry structure of the Armenian economy. So we moved from traditional sectors such as construction and agriculture to services, both financial and other types of services. Also, IT is doing a good job in terms of, again, in terms of the weight in the industry structure. And these are the sectors in which IT and telecommunication, of course. And these are the industries in which we have a better representation by women. And this can explain, basically, this can explain the improvement in the money domain. So we have 11.8 percentage point improvement, and if we go to money dimension, then we can have this number here. So we can see that financial resources have been pretty, so we have got a pretty high number. So concerning the other dimension, it is about I go back and forth because of the time constraints. So concerning the other dimension that was critical for Armenia to score such a high index level, it is power, and it is about the proportion of women in the parliament. Lev actually has motivated an interesting discussion to what extent this kind of data can be relevant in the practical life. So there are two layers. The first one would be that what is the role of the parliament generally, and given that role, which is not that high in Armenia, the composition of the parliament, if women are more represented, still matters. And from that perspective, I would say that Armenian parliament is getting more and more gender balanced, and the tendency continues after Velvet Revolution. And currently, you may know that Armenia is experiencing hard times, and you can see in the parliament that women are pretty active in raising problematic issues, strategic points that are important for a smooth transition of the country during the election period and then expected post-election period. So I would say that the domain power for Armenia is the improvement is real, and I expect that it will be even it will increase, because currently there the parties that are going to take part in elections, they put more and more weight on gender balanced list of candidates for future parliament. I think this is all. Generally, I would say that Armenia, starting from a lower level, the country has improved dramatically, but still, I do believe that there is a potential, there's a resource that Armenia can do, can further improve, and I would say that we have to focus much on the knowledge part of the gender gap. I would expect that in the next few years, the Armenian government will make systematic efforts to improve the women proper representation, also from the knowledge domain perspective. If Knar wants to add anything, she's welcome, of course.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate, your comments. It's Armenia was one of the was the top improver on the index, and it's really remarkable to see the policy, the progress in some policies that you have made. So I'm pretty impressive. Last but not least will be the representative of my homeland, my home country, Ukraine. I give in the floor to Olga Kupets from Kyiv School of Economics, Ukraine. Welcome, Olga.
Hello, thanks a lot for the interesting conference, your great efforts to collect the data and to estimate this index, and I provide my feedback on Ukraine. If we look on the index by different domains, we can see that the highest value is in the time domain, and so someone could argue that the highest gender inequality in Ukraine is in this domain. And if we compare to other countries, Ukraine compares rather favorably. So, and as mentioned also by Irina, it is quite surprising, and I mean, for in Russia, it is also quite high. So I looked inside this index for Ukraine, for Sweden, the top performer in this domain, and Georgia, the poorest performer. And then we look on the index here for 2019. Then we see that, and the reason for no difference over time in all countries is that the data for this index is used only for some survey once during the long period. And for example, in Sweden, a time use survey in 2011, in Ukraine, the survey of men by UNFPA in 1918, and the survey of men and women in Georgia in 1918. And the proportion of time spent on unpaid domestic and care work is inside this index. And if we look on these proportions, we see huge differences. If we calculate time spent on unpaid domestic and care work, we see that in Ukraine, women have almost, they spend almost twice more on this type of work. In Georgia, even more. And still we have quite high level of indices. And if we look in detail in the data used for calculation of this index in Ukraine, this is, as I mentioned, the survey of only men, and they reported about time spent by them and by their partners. And I expect that if women were asked their survey, they would probably report more time, because men could underestimate time spent by their partners. And another issue that, yes, of course, men are quite satisfied with this division of household work. If we see in large cities, the difference in hours per week spent by men and women is even twice larger. And Another question is what are the activities what are done on a regular basis by men and women, and men reported about repairing the house or paying bills, but how often do they do this during a week or during a month or during a year, for example, repairing the house? And therefore, I would like to stress that this index, it is a sign of pre-market gender inequality, not equality, but a huge inequality. And it contributes then to existing labor market inequalities, pre-selection of women into education and healthcare sectors because of some time flexibility, or their pre-selection in self-employment in some individual services or retail trade, again because of time flexibility, low share of women in leadership positions, and then gender pay gaps related to this. And this is due to this women's double workload or second shift, as it is called. So I cannot agree that this index in time use shows us equality. And given this, I would suggest maybe we need to, the ICET team to estimate like an index without time use, because in many countries this is the problems. In Georgia, in here, just 3 examples of countries, and in all countries data are quite different and not quite comparable. And so the question, who answers the main methodological issues, who answers the question, as I mentioned, in Ukraine, men answered, and there can be underestimation. Then what are the age limits? They are quite different, and if we include more older people, then they have more traditional views, and gender division of household work, then maybe results will be quite different in Ukraine, in Georgia, as compared to what we have now. Is it a self-reported estimate, or it is a sum of values reported in a diary like in Sweden, and overall which activities are included, are they comparable? So I see some problems in this domain, and as I mentioned before, I would suggest to estimate like a sub-index without time use index, because it really has a lot of problems in terms of comparability and then in terms of interpretation. Thanks a lot. And many other issues were mentioned by Tatiana Korotka during the previous panel. That's why I didn't stress other issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrika. Actually, your criticism is well taken, because the time dimension really does have, a lot of these issues with, self-reporting and correct estimates, men, women, comparability. This is not just, I guess, a problem that our index would face, but any index that would include time use dimension would face the similar problems. This is why I think it's important not just to present the numbers, right? I mean, but to have a commentary, a story behind this, and to see, as you showed well, I mean, women in Ukraine seem to be doing better than Georgia and many other countries in the former USSR, and still they're doing twice as much work as men. So the fact that they're in better position than others doesn't give us much consolation. So at the end of the day, we need a lot of commentary and policy work, in-depth policy work, to show how things really are and how things evolve. So that point is well taken. Do we have time for some Q&A, or Tamrico, your call? What?
Well, it's a very difficult call because we are 20 minutes over the agenda, but yet on another hand, I hate to interrupt this very rich exchange. So why don't we call for one or two questions, Yaisa, or comments, and then we would probably close. I think we all can continue in different setting this very important exchange on critically important issue for development agenda. So to you, Yaisa, for maybe one or two questions.
Okay, so maybe if I would choose one, maybe I will ask that to the country that we have started this discussion with, Sweden. And one of the interesting issues across Europe and across the world, I guess, was the impact of COVID pandemic on gender equality. And many countries reported different issues. Some even said that, well, the fact that men spend more time at home would make them appreciate, the hard work that women do, and would make the job of gender equality easier going forward. So again, from the top performing country in Europe, question to Pamela: did COVID-19 pandemic tip the scales against gender equality in Sweden, or the other way around? What is your assessment?
Okay, sorry, there was some issue.
Okay, I think you can.
Yes, we did it. We made it. Yes, thanks for the question, Yaroslava. So I cannot answer the question of whether it tipped it around, but definitely I think I can answer the question of whether it did. So COVID, the pandemic, made gender inequality worse in Sweden. Because actually with two colleagues here at site, Jesper Roine and Svante Stromberg, we have been looking into this issue. We had this unique access to administrative data on the registered number of people who register as unemployed every month in Sweden. So we have been comparing this unemployment registration data in 2020 and in 2019. So the change between February and the following months in 2020 and the same in the year before. And at least using this dimension, we don't find evidence of gender inequality. If anything, women in Sweden were relatively less impacted by the pandemic, meaning that the incidence of unemployment for women has been increasing, as pretty much everywhere, but to a lower extent than for men, slightly. And we think this is actually in contrast with what has been shown for some other countries, not all. There is a lot of heterogeneity when you look at the data. In the US, UK, especially there is evidence that women's conditions have been deteriorating, women's in the labor market, conditions in the labor market have been deteriorating, less so in Sweden, but also Germany. For the case of Sweden, what we can say is that, as you know, Sweden has been a bit an exception in the way it has addressed the pandemic. And schools for kids below the age of 14 were never closed in Sweden. So then this one source of increasing inequality has been the fact that kids stay home pretty much everywhere in the world. Moms tend to spend more time, take more responsibility for daycare than fathers. So there was this concern that therefore they would have to work less or even withdraw from the workforce. In Sweden, there was not this need, and because the schools were not closed. And one suggestion could be that one reason for not closing the schools maybe is because Sweden paid more attention to this burden that could be put on family, although that is not the official position. So in this sense, we can only speculate.
This is very, very interesting, Pamela, and I think this COVID-19 research and how it impacted women and men across our transition economies will continue across our networks.
Yeah. in general, what we learned from this exercise, like from reading the literature, is that really we need to study every country separately. We cannot just look at what happened in the US and the UK and then from that say that the gender inequality has been deteriorating or has been improving, because it's very much specific depending also in which sectors women are more concentrated, what type of policies the governments adopted, what type of division of labor there is in the family, and so on and so forth.
So very much based on initial conditions.
Precisely, exactly, yeah.
Thank you very much. So now I think off to Tamrico with the closing remarks. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thanks, Yasha, and thank you everyone for active participation. I think it was a great opportunity not only to present to the broader community of international experts, development professionals, and policymakers, the index, which took a lot of time and effort of ISET Policy Institute's team, but also to hear reflections from senior policymakers, experts, and academic community, all of you who just shared reflections from your own countries. I think it was basically a very in-depth look in the one event, if you wish, which basically showed that there is room for improvement even in Sweden, which is the top performer of the countries that we've been referring to today, as well as how sometimes behind evidence that numbers show there is the other dimension, such as Belarus case, which looks as excellent performer on many fronts of the gender index, while the highlight from Lev, from colleague, was the lack of democracy and freedoms that hinder a sustainability, if you wish, of achievement and standing in terms of various dimensions of gender equality. From ISET Policy Institute's perspective, you all know that we are working on gender economics and gender policy actively. At this point, ISET Policy Institute team is also working on mainstreaming GIA, gender impact assessment, in the policy making in Georgia, and works not only in actual GIAs, but also on its methodology under the funding from UN Women and leadership from UN Women. There are other institutions with which we are cooperating. And as one of you said, this is a beginning, not really a beginning, but we see this as a process. Now that we presented the index in that particular shape, the key issue will remain how individual countries will use this in policy making, how the region will use it in terms of benchmarking progress of individual countries and learning from each other, particular practices, how challenges can be removed, how specific achievements can be shared, and specific actions behind those achievements. So with this, let me close, and under the FROGI project, under the Free Network active community, we hope to continue discussion within the network, within this particular smaller community, but also with a broader community around us in the region, in individual countries and broadly. Thank you very much for your contributions. Have all a very, very nice evening and the rest of the week.